It's Saturday night. That means it's time to take a deeper look at the Iranian nuclear negotiations. Ronald Reagan once saying, "Trust but verify." And that appears to be part of the problem with Iran, trust. Here's why. In 1968, the country signed off on what became known as the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, or NPT for short. The agreement was hailed as a way forward in a world that had seen far too much war. It had its roots in the darkest days of World War II. Erica Pizzi has more.
A short time ago, an American airplane dropped one bomb on Hiroshima and destroyed its usefulness to the enemy.
Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the first time the world saw the devastation and power of nuclear weapons.
The Japanese began the war from the air at Pearl Harbor. They have been repaid many-fold. With this bomb, we have now added a new and revolutionary increase in destruction.
2 bombs dropped by the U.S. killed more than 200,000 people, reduced 2 major Japanese cities to ruins, and left no question World War II was over.
Tens of thousands of proud American flags dotted the square.
And the nuclear arms race was born. The Soviet Union soon began developing its own nuclear arsenal, followed by the UK, France, and then China. As the communist country celebrated its achievement, calls for an end to the arms race grew worldwide. UN talks began, and by 1968, the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty was drawn up.
Mr. President, I hand you the proclamation of the treaty for your signature.
The treaty encourages the pursuit of peaceful nuclear energy, requires disclosure of nuclear programs with the goal of global disarmament.
This is indeed an historic occasion. And as I sit here today, I only hope that those of us who were fortunate enough to be present will look back one day and see that this was the first milestone on a road which led to reducing the danger of nuclear war.
The treaty recognizes the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council as nuclear powers. 185 other countries are also party to the treaty, agreeing not to seek nuclear weapons. Iran is one of them. But since signing it, Iran has launched a nuclear program, which it says is peaceful and does not violate the terms of the treaty.
Iran has approached nuclear technology differently. We are not after nuclear weapons. We are living under the framework of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, and we seek long-term benefits in our nuclear activities.
A few countries have not signed the treaty and cannot be held to its rules. Both India and Pakistan are open about their own nuclear weapons. It's widely believed that Israel has them also, although it has never officially confirmed that. North Korea withdrew from the treaty and has faced sanctions because of its nuclear weapons program. Unlike North Korea, Iran remains party to the treaty and in the spotlight. The U.S. and its allies are determined to know if the country is complying with the treaty or if it's on the road to becoming a nuclear weapons state.
There has been a lot of talk on the other side from the Iranian negotiators about whether, in fact, they can abide by some of the terms that came up in Lausanne. If they cannot, that's going to be a problem. Because I've said from the start, I will walk away from the negotiations if, in fact, it's a bad deal.
Erica Pizzi, Al Jazeera.
Lacey Healy is a senior fellow at the Stimson Center and former policy director at the Center for Arms Control and Nonproliferation. She joins us from Washington, D.C. And Hussein Amir Ahmadi is the president of the Iranian American Council. He is joining us via Skype. Ms. Healy, I'll begin with you. Does a treaty work if not everyone abides by the agreement?
So the great thing about the Non-Proliferation Treaty is that it provides a mechanism by which the United States and its international partners can react if a country is not abiding by its international obligations under the treaty. So, for example, in the case of Iran, Iran was a signatory, one of the first, actually, signatories to the NPT when it opened in 1968. And it since has had some issues where it's, say, secret facilities, in particular, have been discovered by the IAEA, the international watchdog that watches over the signatories to the NPT. Things like this that have sparked interest, particular interest that Iran has been doing, some suspicious activity that have led the international community to believe that Iran might not be complying with its obligations under the NPT. And so this particular treaty still does work because it allows them to then react to Iran's potentially negative movements. And ultimately, that really is what led to the sanctions that have brought Iran to the table and the negotiations that we're in today.
Mr. Amir, do you take Iran at its word when it says that it is only pursuing the peaceful use of nuclear technology, and if so, why?
As we speak at this point, yes. Things could change. Again, I'm not talking about the past. I'm talking about the present, and I'm not talking about the future. I believe nations have different strategies and they make different decisions as things develop. I mean, after the war with Iraq, Iran was extremely nervous about its security, and the whole world, almost the whole world, was behind Saddam Hussein fighting Iran for 8 years. And they developed at that time the idea that to survive, they have to have a capability to defend themselves at the least. So, but then again, things changed. You know, I think years later, Iran became increasingly more confident that it really can defend itself by what they call conventional power that it has. And that's a huge conventional power in terms of the population, the military people, and so on. I think at this point, I think Iran does not have the intention to build nuclear power. But then again,
why do you believe that?
Well,
what makes you think so?
Well, first, Iran is ready and has been ready to open up everything that it has. So we know quite a bit about what's going on in the country. I think the U.S. administration has back in some years ago, I think 2007, the U.S. National Security agency and its affiliates decided, and they wrote and reported that back in 2003, Iran gave up on its intention to develop that nuclear device that supposedly they were after. So it's not me. I think the U.S. government also says that they are not, as we speak, in the mindset of developing a nuclear weapon. What they are concerned, and everybody else is the future. Will Iran stay with that mindset? Will Iran really remain loyal to the decision it has made back in 2003, let's say in 2020? The answer to that question obviously is very complicated. It will depend on the security environment.
Which is why I want to introduce another piece of sound. And this, Ms. Healy, I'll let you talk on the backside of this. Richard Butler was the former Australian ambassador to the UN and a chief weapons inspector in Iraq. He talked to Al Jazeera recently. He says that agreements like the Non-Proliferation Treaty, and his words, are the only way to stop countries that can build a bomb from doing so. Take a listen.
Can anyone be prevented from acquiring them if they know how to build them? The answer is no, and that's a fact. Can circumstances be established, agreement amongst nations, that make it, on balance, far more sensible not to do this than to do it? The answer is yes. That's what we have in the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. That's why some 30 countries, including my own, Australia, who could readily make a nuclear explosive device, don't do so.
But then there are the countries that have been trying. Other nations said to pursue the bomb include Libya, Iraq, North Korea, and Syria. Ms. Healy, South Africa during the apartheid years was said to have the bomb, and Israel, by some estimates, has dozens, if not more. So are we talking about a selective treaty?
Well, this is true, but really, looking at the history of the treaty, nearly 50 years, when the treaty was brought open for signature, there was an estimate that there would be many, many, many more nuclear weapons powers by this time.
So is the glass half empty, or is the nuclear glass half full?
Well, absolutely. We've only seen a few more nuclear powers in this way. We see India, Pakistan, we see North Korea, of course, and we see Israel. And this is really not very many in 50 years. Ultimately, South Africa gave up its nuclear weapons. Libya did not build nuclear weapons. Syria, many of these other countries that might have otherwise. Ukraine was one that chose to give away its nuclear weapons in order to gain not only the security assurances from other countries like the United States, but gain nuclear weapons or nuclear energy technology, which is part of the NPT as well. In giving these countries access to nuclear energy technology, they are able to have a more prosperous society. Many countries are not going to build nuclear weapons purely based on the sheer cost of a nuclear weapons program. It's very, very expensive to build nuclear weapons. It's very expensive even just to do the research.
Which brings me to my next point. Under the terms of the NPT, there is that mechanism that allows a country to withdraw from the treaty after giving 3 months' notice. The first and so far the only country to do so, North Korea in 2003. The country's blatant pursuit of nuclear weapons and ballistic missiles remains problematic to this day. Courtney Keeley has more.
North Korean state television showed pictures of massive rallies in Pyongyang in support of North Korea's withdrawal from the nuclear arms treaty that became effective January 11, 2003. This news announcer said the protesters declared the United States as our enemy and destroyer of world peace and vowed to turn America into a sea of fire and hell. Then Secretary of State Colin Powell called the decision a sad statement on what North Korean leaders think of their own people.
It is their failure to comply with their obligations and their failure to do what they were supposed to do under not only international obligations but the agreed framework entered into with the United States. And we hope that the North Korean leadership will realize the folly of its actions, will realize that the international community and the United States will not be intimidated.
North Korea had threatened for years to drop out of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. When they finally did, it took less than a month to announce the reactivation of its nuclear power facilities. Just 2 months later, it had nuclear weapons. By 2006, the UN Security Council approved a resolution to impose sanctions on North Korea and demanded an end to its nuclear and ballistic missile tests. To this day, despite rounds of talks among several nations, North Korea is still claiming to have extraordinary nuclear capabilities and the ability to miniaturize them. Courtney Keeley, Al Jazeera.
So, Mr. Amir Ahmadi, what about violations that aren't enforced by the international community? Case in point, you just saw North Korea. Does that mean the NPT is worth nothing more than the paper it is printed on?
Well, first, NPT, membership in NPT is voluntary. That is, the countries that are members are voluntarily so. They can, anytime, with a 3 months notice, they can walk out. And the reason they are in the treaty is because supposedly that treaty will give them the right without any problem to develop peaceful nuclear technology for energy and other purposes, and that the international community will also participate in that peaceful nuclear movement. That's the only reason they are there, a member, because otherwise there is no reason for them to be a member and be under any obligation. Remember, NPT has a safeguard agreement with the members that is quite limiting. It imposes all kinds of inspections, and now they have added additional protocol that makes that inspection almost anytime, anywhere kind of a situation. So, if, let's say, a country like Iran, who is a member, and if that country is not going to receive any cooperation, help on developing peaceful nuclear technology, it will have no reason to stay there, because then it will be all liability. There is no asset there.
Ms. Healy, North Korea decides simply in 2003 that it no longer wants to be a party to the NPT and decides it wants to build a bomb. So, Ms. Healy, what is there to stop countries from simply walking away if that's what they want to do? And what good, then, is the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty?
Well, North Korea's decision comes with serious consequences. Not many countries are willing to deal with the extreme international isolation that North Korea has chosen to deal with.
But Kim Jong-un and his father have been willing to do that, and they have been doing that now for 2 generations.
They have been willing to do that, and the U.S. has been willing to allow them to do that as well. North Korea is a special situation, not so much like Iran, where the U.S. and the rest of the international community have made the calculation that they'll be able to contain a North Korean nuclear program. So they're able to contain a North Korean nuclear weapon. They can allow that nuclear weapon to exist on the continent as long as there is not a major development in delivery systems that allow them to get that nuclear weapon elsewhere. They'll deal with that and not launch an attack. Now, in the case of another country such as Iran, the U.S. has been very clear that they would launch an attack in response to any Iranian attempt to build a nuclear weapon, because the country is so much closer and so much more able to launch a nuclear weapon across the border to another U.S. ally, for example, and would pose a much greater threat for that reason. So North Korea is sort of a special case. They're very isolated and able to continue to be isolated in that way, in a way that it's able to deal with.
Ms. Healy, I was doing some checking. Bashar al-Assad, the current leader of Syria, born in 1965. The birth date of Kim Jong-un is unknown, but he is younger. Hiroshima and Nagasaki occurring before they were even born. In fact, 20 years before they were born. Does the world discuss the real-world ramifications of an atomic attack or a nuclear weapon as much as they used to? And should we be talking more about just what would happen if one of these countries got a bomb?
Yeah, I think unfortunately, maybe unfortunately as well, the issue has fallen off the major debate. Of course, people are much worried about gas prices. They're much worried about the things that affect them day to day. But things like nuclear weapons, they can't see them necessarily affecting them. Of course, they see things like terrorism on the news and terrible things happening, and they know terrible things are happening, but they might not be right next door. So maybe it's a good thing in one way that nuclear weapons are not in the news every day, because we don't want them to be in the news every day. But it also is important that we understand that they are a real threat, and even particularly with rising threats between the U.S. and Russia, two of the two largest nuclear arsenals in the world, that there is still a real threat there, and it's really still a possibility that could happen, and we still have to be aware of it. But there's not much we as regular people can do.
Mr. Amir Ahmadi, I'll give you the final word on this. Are you afraid that this many years after Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the world no longer talks about what happens when the bomb goes off and spends all of this time debating about how to make sure somebody doesn't get a bomb?
Well, first, the world has so many nuclear weapons that if anybody starts using any of that, it's going to have to be self-destructive, because the others going to have to immediately respond, and the response is like minutes. I think. But
do you think Kim Jong-un even cares about what you just said?
I hope so. I hope so. The fact is that the countries have become extremely calculated. They have become very cautious, and I think it's a good news is this, that after the World War II, no country has ever used a nuclear weapon. I don't believe that anybody has a reason to do so. Again, we never know. Countries come to a point of the point where they for the existential point that they call it, let's put it that way, they come to a point where that existence comes into question. Of course, at that point, if the country has a nuclear weapon, will use it. And I don't think that, for example, Israel, who has like over 300 nuclear warheads, will ever use that against the Arabs or Iranians or anybody. But then again, if it comes to a point where the Jewish state's survival is at stake, obviously they may think of using it. So again, but largely they have been using it as a deterrent, as opposed to, as I said, defensive or deterrent system, as opposed to offensive system or strategic system. So again, I think the good news is that too many nuclear weapons out there have basically made each other completely obsolete in a way.
Mutually assured destruction, or MAD.
Mutually assured destruction.
Lacey Healy, Senior Fellow at the Stimson Center, and Hushang Amir Ahmadi, President of the Iranian American Council. Both of you, thank you for taking a deeper look.
And thank you for having us.
Thank you.